The neighborhood had always presented itself as a peaceful place, the type of community where lawns stayed trimmed, mailboxes matched in color, and neighbors waved at each other, even if they didn't mean it. The HOA took pride in enforcing these standards, but beneath the neatly manicured surface, resentment simmered. People smiled in front of each other but whispered behind closed doors, compiling mental lists of which neighbors violated which rules. And at the center of many of those whispered lists was a woman named Trisha Mallow, though everyone called her Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down from me, in a 2-story white brick home with shutters she repainted biannually in whatever trendy color she'd seen online that week. She attended every HOA meeting, sat in the front row, and insisted on documenting even the most minor violations. If someone left a trash bin out an hour past collection, she reported it. If a car tire touched a blade of grass, she photographed it. If children chalked the sidewalk, she emailed the HOA president about vandalism. Most neighbors learned very quickly, to avoid eye contact with her, I had managed to stay off her radar. At least until the morning she noticed my new smart doorbell. IT was an upgrade I'd planned for months. The old camera had become unreliable. Sometimes it lagged, sometimes it failed to record deliveries altogether. The new one promised high clarity, better motion detection, and improved night vision. I installed it myself late one Saturday evening, testing its field of view, adjusting the angle, and making sure it only covered my property. It never occurred to me that anyone would take issue with it. After all, half the houses already had some kind of smart surveillance. But the very next morning, I saw her standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, staring at my doorbell with an expression equal parts disgust and triumph. Like she had just caught me committing a felony in broad daylight. Within hours, I received the first email from the HOA. They claimed they had received a complaint alleging that my smart doorbell camera was recording neighboring properties without consent, which, they warned, constituted a violation of community privacy rules. They demanded immediate confirmation that the device did not record areas beyond my porch. The email's tone was stern, almost threatening, clearly influenced by the complainant's intensity. And of course, at the bottom of the forwarded message from concerned resident number 14, I recognized Karen's distinctive phrasing, formal, accusatory, and dripping with self-righteous certainty. I replied with screenshots showing the doorbell's field of view, demonstrating that it stopped at the edge of my walk. I explained that the camera only activated when someone approached my porch. Couldn't see her driveway, windows, or any other private areas. I expected that would be the end of the matter. But Karen was not satisfied. The very next day, she stood in front of my house again, this time holding her phone in one hand and making exaggerated gestures, as if recording evidence for some ongoing legal battle. Later, I learned she had forwarded those recordings to the HOA with new accusations. She now claimed the camera was tracking her, that its lens followed her movements, that every time she walked past my house, even on the opposite side of the street, the camera pinged her phone with malicious intent. Her words were beyond dramatic, they were delusional. But the HOA, unwilling to dismiss any complaint without thorough investigation, emailed me again. This time, they insisted I disable the device while they reviewed the case. That request triggered something in me, frustration mixed with disbelief. Disabling a security device on my own home because one neighbor felt uncomfortable? Felt absurd. But I tried to be reasonable. I sent the HOA a detailed explanation of how the doorbell functioned, including anonymized logs showing its motion events. The device had activated twice since installation, once when I tested it and once when a package arrived. Neither activation lined up with the times Karen claimed it tracked her. Still, the HOA insisted on escalating. They scheduled a mandatory compliance review, which sounded less like a meeting and more like a disciplinary hearing. When the announcement circulated among the community email list, neighbors began whispering. Some speculated I had installed an advanced surveillance system. Others assumed I was hacking into their Wi-Fi. A few even avoided walking near my property, detouring around the block just to avoid appearing in the supposed footage. Karen, unsurprisingly, reveled in the attention. She strutted around the neighborhood like a sheriff, warning others about the man with the spying device. And as absurd as it was, people listened. Fear spreads easily when wrapped in plausible technical jargon, and Karen's dramatic storytelling convinced a handful of residents that my camera posed a threat. I realized that reasoning would not work here. Facts did not matter when emotions were already inflamed. Still, I held on to the belief that the truth would come out once the HOA conducted a formal review. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse 1 week later. I walked in expecting a fair, objective process. Instead, I found a folding table with 3 HOA board members, a small crowd of curious neighbors, and Karen sitting in the front row wearing an expression of vindicated triumph. She seemed convinced she had already won. The board asked routine questions: how the device worked, what it recorded, what the logs showed. I presented everything calmly, even offering to let them inspect the device directly. Karen, however, insisted that none of my evidence mattered because the camera clearly followed her. She repeated the accusation as if it were undeniable truth, confident the board would accept her claims over factual data. But something shifted when the HOA president asked whether she had any technical evidence to support her accusations. Karen's confidence wavered for the first time. She stammered, offering vague statements about feeling watched and seeing the lens move. She insisted she knew what she saw. Yet when asked whether she owned any devices capable of detecting wireless interference or unauthorized recording, she hesitated. She finally admitted to having access to several network monitoring apps, which she used to check the neighborhood's Wi-Fi traffic. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They asked her to clarify. She attempted to gloss over the details, but the slip was already out in the open. The meeting ended with no immediate decision. The board promised to review all evidence and respond within a week. Karen left with stiff posture and nervous steps, a stark contrast to her earlier theatrics. I walked home feeling a mix of annoyance and relief. At least the board had seen that she lacked proof. The truth, I felt, was starting to push its way through the fog she created. But that night, something unexpected happened. I received an alert from my router. An unfamiliar device had attempted to connect to my home network. The signal originated from a house just down the block. The metadata matched a device belonging to none other than Karen.it. Was in that moment I realized the accusation she made against me might not simply be delusional paranoia. It might be projection. Something was very wrong, and for the first time, I suspected that whatever she was hiding went far beyond false complaints. And as I stared at the network logs blinking on my screen, I knew this story was only beginning. The network alert lingered on my screen longer than it should have, pulsing like a quiet alarm only I seemed able to hear. The unfamiliar device name, the matching MAC address prefix, and the proximity of the signal strength left little room for guessing. It wasn't a random passerby or a glitch in the system. It came from someone close, someone within Wi-Fi range. And given the earlier events, everything pointed in one direction. Yet the idea felt almost surreal. Karen, the neighborhood's self-proclaimed guardian of privacy, the same woman who passionately lectured anyone who so much as placed a camera-facing window, was attempting to connect to my home network? The irony would have been laughable if the implications weren't so unsettling that I saved the logs and archived the alerts. If this escalated, and I suspected it would, every piece of evidence would matter. The next morning, the neighborhood felt unusually tense. Small clusters of residents stood along the cul-de-sac, bundled in light jackets, whispering in hushed tones while pretending to check their mailboxes or adjust their sprinklers. When I stepped outside, their glances briefly flitted toward me, sharp and cautious, like I was a subject in a community-wide investigation. Word had spread faster than the facts. Rumors often outran truth, mutating with every retelling, shaping perceptions before evidence even surfaced. As I walked toward my driveway, I caught sight of Karen standing across the street, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. She wasn't filming anything this time, nor was she inspecting my doorbell. She simply stared, long enough to make it clear she wanted me to notice. When she finally turned away, it wasn't with the confidence she had displayed before. There was something else now, wariness mixed with calculation. For the next few days, I monitored my network carefully. The attempted connection repeated twice more, each time from the same device signature. It never succeeded. My network security was strong, but the persistence was alarming. It indicated deliberate effort, not accidental overlap. Someone was trying to access my camera feeds or device logs. Someone who knew enough to install network scanning tools and attempt multiple infiltration methods. This wasn't simple curiosity. Meanwhile, the HOA remained silent. No decisions, no updates, no follow-up questions. Just a heavy, pending silence hanging over the neighborhood like humidity before a storm. I suspected they were still reviewing evidence, possibly even consulting someone with technical expertise. And as much as I disliked their neutrality, I hoped they were taking everything seriously. Midweek, everything shifted. Around noon, I noticed an unfamiliar SUV parked near the community clubhouse. A man stepped out mid-40s, wearing a polo embroidered with the logo of a local IT auditing firm. He carried a black case shaped like it held diagnostic equipment. At first, I assumed he was there for unrelated HOA business. But when he walked directly toward the HOA president's house, the connection became clear. The board had hired someone. The situation had escalated beyond simple neighbor conflict. Either the board wanted to verify the claims against me, or, more likely, they sensed inconsistencies in Karen's story and decided to investigate more broadly. What they discovered over the next few days rippled through the neighborhood like an electrical current. The specialist did a full review of my doorbell system first. It took him less than half an hour to confirm everything I had already shown. The camera was calibrated to its default field of view, recorded only motion toward my porch, and had no capability of targeting anyone across the street. He documented the findings and left without any concern. But he didn't stop there. Next, with the board's approval, he began discreetly assessing the network environment around the neighborhood, checking for signal anomalies, unauthorized hotspots, and suspicious traffic patterns. The process was slow, methodical, technical. Neighbors watched from windows and porches, whispering, speculating, wondering whose devices would be scrutinized next. Karen became strangely invisible during this period. No morning patrols. No sidewalk observations. No HOA emails sent from her address. It was as if she was hiding in plain sight, hoping silence would erase the suspicion forming around her. But in a community where everyone watched everyone else, her sudden absence only amplified attention. 3 days into the investigation, the specialist arrived at Karen's house. Even from a distance, the tension was clear. He wasn't invited inside. She refused to unlock her door, speaking through a small crack, gesturing defensively. But the agreement with the HOA granted at least partial access, specifically to inspect whether any community Wi-Fi protocols or shared networks were being misused. When Karen realized she couldn't refuse entirely, she relented, though only marginally. She stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind her, blocking entry. She insisted she had nothing to hide. But her insistence, paired with her refusal to allow a full inspection, only raised more questions. The specialist, undeterred, performed an external scan from the sidewalk. Though limited, it revealed enough. There were anomalies, unusually active packets, atypical Wi-Fi noise patterns, and evidence of a device broadcasting a separate SSID hidden behind her main network. Hidden networks weren't always illegal, but they raised suspicions, especially in light of her recent behavior. By the fifth day, murmurs circulated that the HOA board had held an emergency meeting. Closed door, no public minutes, no homeowner attendance allowed. Whatever they discussed was confidential, but the neighborhood's collective curiosity ballooned. People started congregating near the clubhouse at odd hours, hoping to overhear something. The feeling of unity against a common unknown enemy hung in the air, even though no one openly said her name. The official email arrived the next morning. The HOA announced they were conducting a compliance audit of several homes, following concerning findings related to community network interference and potential privacy violations. They didn't specify names, but no one needed them. The shift in tone, the absence of accusations toward me, the sudden defensive behavior from Karen, it all converged into one inevitable conclusion. Still, the board emphasized the investigation was ongoing, urging residents to remain calm. But calm was the last thing anyone felt. Fear spread, fear not of being recorded, but of being exposed. Some residents began checking their own routers, searching for signs they didn't fully understand. Others whispered about smart TVs, baby monitors, and Wi-Fi-enabled appliances, wondering what else might have been compromised. Meanwhile, the attempted connections to my network stopped entirely. It was as if the person behind them sensed scrutiny closing in. The silence, instead of reassuring, felt like a retreat before a larger confrontation. Sunset that day. As the sky dimmed and porch lights flickered on, I noticed Karen again, standing at her window. She watched the street with frantic eyes, peeking through blinds that barely concealed her panic. She must have known the investigation was pointing toward her. She must have sensed the walls were closing in. But what she didn't know was that the truth was much larger than one piece of network interference. Because the specialist had mentioned something quietly. Something he had found but hadn't yet put into an official report. Something he wanted to verify before he presented it to the HOA. He suspected Karen had been connecting not just to my network, but to multiple neighbors' devices. Cameras, doorbells, baby monitors, anything with a signal. And the patterns he'd identified suggested this wasn't a recent behavior. It might have been happening for months. As that realization settled over me, the weight of the situation grew heavier. This wasn't petty neighborhood drama anymore. This was privacy invasion on a scale no one in the community had imagined. And the storm was only gathering momentum. The quiet before a collapse always feels unnatural. Like the air is too still, the clock's too loud, the footsteps too soft. That was the atmosphere settling across the neighborhood as the HOA's investigation approached its end. No more curious crowds lingered on sidewalks. No more whispering clumps of residents huddled near the clubhouse. Everyone seemed to retreat into their homes, closing blinds and locking doors, as if they were bracing for an announcement that would redefine the community. And they were right to brace. The morning began with an unusual sight. The IT specialist returned, this time accompanied not by a single board member but by the entire HOA leadership team. They walked together with a kind of solemn purpose, their steps heavy with the weight of whatever conclusion they'd reached. From my window, I watched them pause in the middle of the street, forming a small, tense circle. A few neighbors peeked from behind curtains, sensing something imminent. Then, in a move that surprised even me, the group turned toward Karen's house. They walked up her driveway slowly, deliberately, as if the very act carried symbolic gravity. Karen opened the door before they could knock, as though she had been standing there, waiting, listening for footsteps. Her face bore a brittle smile, one that quivered at the corners, unable to hide the strain beneath. The HOA president stepped forward. Though his voice was too far away to hear, his posture told enough. There was no friendliness, no neighborly courtesy, only formal authority. He held a printed packet, several pages thick, the edges clipped neatly. Karen's eyes fell on the packet with a fear she couldn't disguise. She tried to interrupt. Her hands gestured sharply, defensively. She shook her head, palms facing out as though pushing away invisible accusations. But the president simply lowered the packet toward her, insistent and unyielding. The rest of the board watched stiffly, their expressions carefully neutral, revealing nothing but discomfort. When Karen refused to take the papers, the president set them on her porch railing. That single, simple act made her composure crack. Her expression shifted, first panic, then anger, then something like desperation. She backed into her doorway, clutching the frame, refusing to let the door swing open too far, as though keeping the board out would protect her from whatever was written in that packet. But the truth was already exposed. The board dispersed quietly, leaving Karen frozen in her doorway. The specialist walked away last, giving her one final look of regret mixed with confirmation. His findings complete, his work finished. Whatever they discovered, it was now official, and within an hour, the announcement arrived. The HOA sent an urgent community-wide email titled, "Security Notice. Unauthorized network breach identified." It was short, concise, and shockingly direct compared to their usual bureaucratic tone. The message explained that multiple homes in the community had been subjected to unauthorized attempts at accessing private network devices. These attempts were traced to a specific residence. Although the email stopped short of naming Karen directly, the implication was unmistakable. Everyone already knew who had been under investigation, and everyone knew the board had just walked to her house minutes before. The neighborhood erupted, people poured into driveways, gathering in uneasy clusters. Conversations were no longer whispers, they were loud, angry, animated. Some residents looked frightened. Others were furious. A few were almost vindicated, as if this confirmed suspicions they'd held for years. The idea that someone, especially someone who pretended to be the guardian of rules, had been attempting to infiltrate their private cameras and network sent shockwaves through the community. Theories spread rapidly. People wondered what she had seen, what she had recorded, what information she had accessed. Was she spying out of paranoia, curiosity, control, or something else entirely? Every house with a smart device suddenly felt violated that I stepped outside for the first time that afternoon, needing fresh air despite the tension. Immediately, several neighbors approached me, some apologizing for assuming the worst when Karen first complained, others sharing their own unsettling discoveries. One neighbor found suspicious login attempts on their garage door system. Another noticed unusual data spikes from their baby monitor. A third admitted their smart TV had been acting strange for months but had dismissed it as a glitch. It all pointed back to the same source. As dusk settled, the situation escalated further. Police cars appeared, quiet, unhurried, non-emergency vehicles. Their presence was not dramatic, but it was decisive. Officers approached Karen's home, speaking calmly but firmly. Though I couldn't hear what was said, her posture, rigid, trembling, suggested she understood the gravity of their visit. They weren't there to arrest her. Not yet, at least. They were there to retrieve the devices flagged by the specialist's findings. They carried out a small router, a laptop, and what looked like a signal repeater. Karen watched helplessly, refusing eye contact with the gathering spectators lining the sidewalks. Her previous confidence, once unshakable, had collapsed completely as the last officer stepped off her porch. Karen closed her door and pulled the shades tight enough to wrinkle. It was the final image the neighborhood saw of her that night, hiding behind darkened windows, the queen of complaints dethroned by her own digital footprints. The HOA later released a follow-up email clarifying the outcome. Karen was suspended from the association, stripped of voting privileges, and prohibited from attending meetings pending a full legal review. They emphasized that the data collected so far did not indicate she accessed content successfully, only that she attempted to multiple times across multiple homes. But even without proof of successful breaches, the damage was already done. The next morning, a moving truck appeared in front of her house that no one saw her pack. No one spoke to her. She never stepped outside except to close the truck's rear door. By the afternoon, she was gone, leaving behind a house with drawn curtains and a mailbox still stuffed with HOA pamphlets about privacy regulations she once weaponized. The neighborhood slowly returned to a quieter state, though not the same state as before. There was a new sense of caution now, but also clarity, exposing the difference between genuine safety concerns and manufactured paranoia. And as for me, the doorbell that started it all remained exactly where it was, its lens watching peacefully over my porch. The HOA declared it fully compliant, even suggesting other residents upgrade their own devices for better security. The irony was not lost on anyone. In the end, the truth had surfaced. Not through arguments, emotions, or accusations, but through undeniable technical evidence. And the same technology Karen had feared became the tool that revealed her secret. The neighborhood, shaken but wiser, slowly stitched itself back together. But Karen's story became a permanent cautionary tale, one repeated in community meetings, shared over backyard fences, and whispered when new neighbors moved in, a story of misplaced accusations, hidden intentions, and the unexpected discovery that sometimes the person shouting the loudest about privacy is the one violating it all along.